I'm engaging Honorable Musalia Mudavadi, the ANC leader. Good to see you, Mheshimiwa.
Thank you.
So let me just begin with the first question. We've seen a lot of statements coming from you as the ANC leader, criticizing the government, actually putting the government on the spot, especially on matters of corruption and the debt that this country is facing. Perhaps one will ask, is it okay to refer to you as the de facto leader of the opposition now?
I have no qualms with that, my friend. I think the reality is that as things stand now, I am literally the only voice that is speaking out on the more sensitive issues affecting the country at this point in time.
Yes. So one will ask, where does this motivation come from? Because they have never been used to saying statements from you with regards to especially criticizing the government. Is it because Raila Odinga and perhaps Kalonzo Musyoka and the other bandwagon had left NASA?
You see, I believe in being very principled in the politics that we want to conduct in this country. And it would be good that we start looking more at the matters of principle in our politics going to the future. It will be healthy for our country, and it is important for the future generations. So as far as I'm concerned, we are a multi-party state, and the Constitution defines us as a multi-party state. After the election, after the electoral process, Jubilee has got the mantle to lead. Whether we may disagree in the mode in which they may have gotten there, but the fact of the matter is that they now are the ones in the driving seat. There is a whole constituency of so many other millions of Kenyans who voted for NASA, who wanted a different approach to the way state and national affairs are conducted. Now, in voting for the NASA team, they wanted us to stand true to their cause. And as far as I'm concerned, it would be a breach of trust from these voters if we all now changed midstream and trooped to the government. And then they say, we are doing so because we want inclusivity. I think that is the wrong perception, the wrong concept in what is maybe happening in the country today. So I want to stand very clearly and say that the country needs a responsible, it needs a loyal opposition. And when I say loyal, it means loyal to the nation and also loyal to the head of state. There's nothing wrong in being in opposition. There's nothing that says if you're in opposition, you're unpatriotic. Nothing says that.
So you're saying NASA supporters are now disappointed that now Raila Odinga is out of the picture?
Let me tell you, they're not very happy with the turn of events after the elections and how they perceive things unfolding. I can tell you that for free.
Yes. Time and again, some people, especially among the political class, have been referring to you as the last man standing in NASA. Does NASA exist? Because we've had statements from your core principal, one of them that is Moses Wetangula, who has time and again referred to NASA as a moribund organization, as an organization that, a coalition that is on its deathbed.
The truth is that from a legal perspective, NASA exists. Okay?
In reality?
Now, in reality, this is the challenge, because legally, the document that brought us together is still alive. It was filed with the Registrar of Political Parties, and it is very clear that if 3 parties walk out, okay, if 3 political parties walk out and do so formally by notifying the Registrar of Political Parties, then the coalition is deemed to have ceased to exist.
That has not happened yet.
That has not happened.
We'll talk about the merger between Fort Kenya and NC shortly, but there's something else that a lot of people are talking about. I've started earlier by saying that there have been a lot of political development in this country this year. The latest being your meeting with a section of Central Kenya members of Parliament. What was the meeting all about?
This was a meeting where we are exchanging ideas. And I'll tell you, we had an opportunity to discuss the current or the unfolding events in Kenya, where we discussed the possibility of constitutional amendments. We came to an understanding that it may not, it is important for us to appreciate that there may be need for some amendments. But what we have to all stand for is to make sure that those amendments are arrived at after broad consultations by Kenyans of all walks of life, not just the political class, and to make sure that such amendments are genuinely for the welfare of the Kenyan people and not to satisfy the egos of a section of the Kenyan people. That is a very fundamental principle that we should bear in mind. All right? We discussed the ongoing fight against corruption. It is good. It is necessary. It must be intensified. It must be supported.
Are you saying there was no mention of the 2022?
No.
No. And they all know very well that you have presidential ambitions.
They know I have.
How's the mood like, perhaps?
They know I have presidential ambitions. I think the mood was very cordial. All right, but these are also serious leaders, high-profile leaders in Kenya, from the central Kenya region, and I can tell you they're intelligent enough to know that there's a time or there's a season for each kind of challenge. And as far as we are concerned, we have 3 years to go before we come to the next election. So in between, there are issues like the IEBC that must be corrected. There's the census that is coming through, all right? And then there's the need for the broad-based dialogue before we actually come to the question of the election of 2022.
Before you talk about handshake, that is the handshake between Raila Odinga and President Uhuru Kenyatta, and of course the referendum question, let's still talk about the politics of the day. And you coming from the western side of this country, the political observers were saying that Mudavadi is trying to get this national appeal by trying to approach people from central Kenya, but he has not yet taken care of his backyard. Case in point, there are certain politicians who've actually jumped camp from last year's general election. They were in the opposition, now they're in Jubilee.
You know, I always muse over this issue about Musalia Mudavadi taking care of the Western, or the Luyas and so forth. I still maintain my birthright is there. I'm born there, but I'm a Kenyan, okay? And I say that the Luyas ought to be respected for one thing. They have shown what it means to embrace other Kenyans over time. These are people who have voted for Moi. They have voted for Kibaki. They have voted for Raila. You know?
They're basically a democratic society.
They're a democratic society.
So the elusive Luya unity is neither here nor there.
So to continuously refer to them as elusive Luya unity, when they are giving the best example of the need to show that we should be free to vote for anybody without intimidation, because people are expecting them to conform. You see, they're saying, we have seen Luos vote for nobody else but Luos. We have seen a Kikuyu vote for nobody else but a Kikuyu. We have seen a Kalenjin vote for nobody else but a Kalenjin. Why aren't you Luyas doing that? I mean, isn't it the reverse psychology here?
Interesting.
So I think it is a model that needs to be looked at, because going into the future, if we are talking of the need to have national cohesion, of the need to have integration, then I think the media and the people should start looking at the Western Kenya voting patterns as an example to be emulated and not an example to be vilified.
Mhm. That's a very interesting perspective, but I'm sure there are other Western Kenya leaders who always talk about the need to unify the Western Kenya voters. But
and I don't have anything wrong with unifying them. Okay, true to the Murembe word,
Yes.
you know, Murembe means peace. So it is good to have that, but we should never be talking about unifying so that we can exclude others.
Speaking about exclusion, let's talk about the event that took place on March 9, the handshake between Raila Odinga and President Uhuru Kenyatta. I'm sure this is something that you've made your stand clear on before. Perhaps as we close the year 2018, what do you have to say about the handshake? Do you think it's going to offer some solution to this country as far as, you know, bringing this country together is concerned?
I think the positive side about the handshake is that it may have eased tensions, bringing in some tranquility, so that the politics that is dogged by insults and stone throwing and what have you and all this viciousness is diminished. Okay, so to that extent, I say it is a positive thing. But we must also know that lasting peace must not be hinged on the basis of the handshake alone. Because the authors of the handshake, and I've said this, have got a long way to go in persuading Kenyans that the handshake was not just about them. They still have to do a lot of work on that particular issue.
Make sure everybody else is brought on board.
Kenyans are feeling. Then, we then have to look at it and say, because if in case one of them reneges, in case one of them pulls away and says, all right, I'm now disowning the handshake. So what happens? Should people explode? We don't want that to happen. So we want a process. Okay? The handshake was an event. But true cohesion and harmony in the country means that the issues that have constantly led to tension need to be resolved. We cannot all agree that the IEBC has been bungling elections and creating tension. And now, 1 year after the election, we have done nothing to start the process of reforming the IEBC when the Auditor General's reports are showing scandals right at the midst of it, when the institution is not properly constituted. And we are talking of a referendum, and this referee who gives penalties at will is still in place as he was before the election.
Actually, there's some commissioners missing.
Some commissioners. So it's a very dangerous trend. So to show resolve and to show the goodwill, I think this is one starting point. It is a low-hanging fruit that can be dealt with earlier going forward.
The handshake has resulted to the BBI, that is the Building the Bridges Initiative, a task force that is meant to bring the country together, and they have a 9-point objective, one of them being everything to do with the electoral justice. You know, they need to reform or look into the electoral body IEBC. First of all, what's your view towards the Building the Bridges Initiative?
Well, that is an extension of the handshake, isn't it?
Yes.
All right, and I've constantly said that the initiative must never be seen that it is an initiative of two individuals. There must be a broader buy-in.
But they're the appointees of these two individuals.
That's the point. That is the point I keep on saying. I don't have to sit on the table myself. All right? But you must remember there was a concept around the constitution that we have today, built under structures like the Bombers structure. You remember that? Okay? It's in the public domain. You could see the level of public participation and inclusion. And that is why, in spite of the few misgivings within our constitution, we find that that was perhaps the best constitution-making process that you can ever come across. All right? So what we are saying is that unless we change midstream and find a way of broadening this, you will start finding different initiatives coming from different corners on what ought to be done without a clear round the table negotiation. And that can make the referendum that is forthcoming very divisive.
Speaking about referendum, there are critics out there who are saying that the BBI is meant to lay down, a foundation of some sort to justify the need for a referendum in this country. First of all, do you think we're in the right frame of mind as a country for a possible referendum?
You see, a referendum will come on a specific issue, yes. All right, or the questions that are to be put. But we need to isolate those issues, right? In fact, people have been talking more about the referendum, but we have not isolated the issues. Yes. So I go back to what I said earlier, that let's have a structured dialogue where people have more confidence. Let all the institutions that matter in this country, the cross-section of Kenyans, have an opportunity to buy into a national dialogue framework, which will then help in isolating the issues that we may not have succeeded in dealing with in the context of our current constitution. And then on the basis of that, the referendum question can be formulated. Then at that time, you can paint as the reds or the blues. Because then we'll be either for the changes that are being proposed or against the changes that are being proposed. But as things stand now, as we sit here, you and I, there is no referendum question before the Kenyan people yet. We have to define that question.
Fear out there is that, the political class actually have already started the process of hijacking the referendum itself, because they're those who are proposing the formation of a prime minister's position, and they're not even talking about the basic things that affect the Kenyan people.
Precisely. That is the point. That is the point that I said. If it is seen that the proposed amendments are just supposed to satisfy the egos of the politicians, then we have got it wrong. Kenya does not belong to politicians alone. There are millions of other Kenyans, and their concerns must be put on the table. The welfare of those Kenyans and our economy must be put on the table.
Let's talk about your political party, ANC. Initially, we've seen a lot of, people talking about the possible merger between ANC and Ford Kenya, and all of a sudden things went silent. I mean, where are you as far as the merger is concerned?
That is a work in progress, my friend, because truth be told, when we talked about the merger, we said that it is a process that needs to be discussed very carefully, also internalized by the various political party structures, because it's a process. And if it materializes, it can only materialize in the course of next year, because all these structures in political parties have got to consider it. So that is one. And we actually said that if it were to materialize, we can only give that answer in the course of next year, when people have internalized. What are the implications?
So you're giving a time frame of up to next year?
Yes.
There was no wrangles or any other problems?
We had, no, there were some issues, because as we were talking about the possibility of merger, and we set up a committee, the truth is one of the Ford Kenya members started talking from a very different perspective. And these are issues that we felt Ford Kenya has got to resolve internally before we move to the next step. Yeah.
Speaking about mergers, once again, you were at Central Kenya yesterday talking to a section of members of parliament and leaders there. Perhaps is ANC going to have any kind of coalition or merger with any other political party apart from Ford Kenya? Is it something you're looking at?
You cannot rule that out, because when you're forming alliances, national alliances, you must be prepared to reach out to Kenyans from every corner. Therefore, if it reaches a stage that there's a commonality of ideas and approach with people from Central Kenya, with people from northeastern Kenya, with people from the coast, why shouldn't we work together?
So you're open to everyone?
I'm open.
Have anyone approached you, for instance, especially the top brass, politically speaking?
Well, if you are talking with the kind of leaders that you say you saw, then doesn't that tell you that there are people from also very high level politically who are interested in what ANC is, and are also interested in my approach to national issues.
Does that include the KANU leader, Gideon Moi? We saw you together in Kakamega some time back.
Remember, we have cooperated with Gideon before. We were in a Mani coalition together in the 2013 election. Yeah, so we are not averse to working together.
You're not ruling out. What about the Deputy President?
He's a competitor. He has chosen directly and he has said it, that he's eyeing the 2022 position. So let's be realistic. Let's not live in fantasy. Because if he's declared that he's going for the presidency, and I'm also declaring that I'm going for the presidency, then what is true is that there'll be a competition. Now, you cannot then, therefore, have any other arrangement under that circumstance.
What if he agrees to say Musalia Mudavadi Tosha and he takes the second position?
That is what I call fantasy.
That's not going to happen.
Yes.
Okay.
Right.
As we conclude, corruption. Once again, it's something that you've released statement about. You've criticized the government heavily on how we're borrowing. And when you talk about corruption, there's no way we can avoid to talk about the 5.4 trillion debt that Kenya is facing at the moment. And we've seen some sort of back and forth between the executive and the judiciary, the president being the latest person who has criticized the judiciary just the other day. I mean, what's your observation in all this?
First of all, I think the fight against corruption must be intensified and must be sustained, all right? And positive steps have been made, starting from the office of the president itself and moving down to the DPP, the DCI, the Ethics and Anti-Corruption Body, and the judiciary. Now, and to avoid a blame game. But let us see what makes things work. The first issue that I would put across to them is that fund the institutions that fight corruption appropriately. Give the DPP enough resources. He had been given 3.6 billion. The EACC had been given 3.4 billion. I think the judiciary had about 15 billion. All right? Parliament takes away 46 billion. Parliament sits 2 days in a week. Tuesday afternoon, the whole of Wednesday, and Thursday afternoon. And then the rest is broken down into committees. And where does Parliament sit? In Nairobi. It does not sit anywhere else. It sits in Nairobi. They've given themselves 46 billion. They even want to increase their salaries.
And allowances.
And allowances. But on this other side, you are denying the judiciary the resources. Parliament, the judiciary sits 5 days in a week, and sometimes even by Saturday, depending on the emergency. And they are virtually everywhere in the country. They have a total of about 7,000 employees. Parliament has a total of about 1,000 employees. Then on this side, you give the EACC 3.4. You give the DPP 3.6. If you're going to fight, and the DCI, I wonder what they got. If you're going to fight corruption, equip these agencies both in terms of resource, human resource, and financial resource, and technological resource. So Parliament must live up to expectations, must help the executive, the president, that if indeed we are now committing to the war against corruption, let these agencies be properly resourced. So I think that chapter is there. But the fight must continue, and we must go beyond that. We must equip even the tracing of assets agency more effectively. Because when you see what was recovered so far and what is estimated to have been lost, there's a very big gap. So that is another window, because once people know that I'm going to lose everything, then the propensity to engage in corruption will diminish. Yes. And there's a friend of mine who said, you know, you Kenyans, and he used these words, and I just want to paraphrase so that you can understand. He said that, why are Kenyans manufacturing corruption on an industrial scale? Why are Kenyans manufacturing corruption on an industrial scale?
Actually, some people have referred to Kenya as a looter's paradise.
So that is the issue. Now, come to the public debt issue. Public debt has risen at a very high pace. And you ask yourself, to a very high level and at a very high pace, why the haste to incur this debt within such a short time frame? And you all just need to go back to the Treasury reports themselves, and you will see that the debt that the Grand Coalition government, the Kibaki government left, and the way this debt has accumulated to now, the proportions are extraordinary. So we stand at about 5.4 trillion at this time, which is now close to 60% of GDP. My friend, in 2022, the government in power will be busy struggling on how to deal with this public debt that we are accumulating. And you may find there will be very little resources for development. So we need to find a strategy, a common strategy, a national strategy that is understood and adhered to so that we can stem the problem. And I'll give a good example. Ireland has got a classic example. And we can borrow. We don't have to invent the wheel. We can borrow from their experience. In the 2000s, early 2000s, Ireland was in a serious debt crisis. They ended up creating a National Treasury Management Agency to focus on debt management, prudent use, good use of resources, advisory to even parastatals. And you can see some of the parastatals are also responsible for some of these mega debts. And Ireland was able to steer itself out of that. Right now, we don't have a seriously functioning debt management office. It is there as an office under the Treasury, working at the whims of the Treasury. No independence to be able to advise the Treasury that you are entering into a wrong debt.
Well said. As we conclude, you've already talked about a possible merger between Ford Kenya and ANC, something that should be concluded by next year once you iron out the issues that are there. I mean, I'm sure the people who are wondering what is in store for ANC come 2019 as we cross over to the new year.
I think we'll continue to consolidate. Yes. This is important. You must always work on the basis that you build your party. So whatever partnerships that will evolve going forward, they must come into place with a clear understanding that we have also invested as ANC members in building a brand, a strong brand that will be attractive to genuine political partnerships. But the last one is to also ask Kenyans to reflect a little bit and to empathize with families that are in court in certain areas because they cannot find their loved ones. And we don't know whether their loved ones are lost through extrajudicial killings or kidnappings or whatever. And it behoves on the security agencies because their mandate is to provide security for all. And I think this issue needs to be tackled so that the rule of law can be properly upheld in the...
Honorable Musalia Mudavadi, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Asante sana.
Asante sana.